Hello, landscape architects. Let's make some noise. How about San Diego? Are you in the house? Woo! Thank you, and good afternoon. On behalf of the American Society of Landscape Architects, welcome to this very important presentation. We are so delighted to have so many people from the San Diego community here today to join us for this critical conversation. As we all know, California is setting the example for taking bold action to tackle climate change. And we should all follow in their footsteps. Now, the issue of climate change requires that everyone, professionals and the public alike, unite in a common cause to demand action and implement solutions. And so I'm going to pause here, and I know backstage they're going to get a little discombobulated, but I'm going to tell you a quick story. On my way over, I was feeling nervous, getting prepared for this, and I stopped in the ladies' room to splash some cold water on my face. And about 2 sinks over from me, there was a young woman looking me up and down. I thought we recognized each other or something, so I said, "Hello, how are you doing?" And she nodded, but moved on. She then came back into the restroom and said, "You know, that is an interesting outfit that you have on." She said, "You've got the African batik skirt, the feminine strand of pearls, this very masculine men's shirt on. Very interesting, but somehow it works." Talk about your backhanded compliments, right? But I am going to take it as a compliment. I'm going to take it as commentary. I'm going to take it as maybe a metaphor or an allegory of how sometimes things that don't seemingly go together, like conservatives and progressives, park designers and parking lot designers, lawyers and anyone else, all races, all religions, all backgrounds, things that don't necessarily go together, but can somehow work. And that's how I feel about addressing the climate change issue. I think we can all come together to come up with creative solutions to address this problem. So, back to the monitors. We titled this session, "No Time to Waste," because ASLA strongly believes the time for debating, for questioning, it's over. We must accept the science. We must accept the facts. We must take immediate action to prevent global catastrophe. It is impossible for me to overstate the consequences here. We all see it. We feel it. Our seas are rising. Our coastal communities are threatened. Droughts, floods, wildfires are increasing. Extreme weather events are becoming everyday occurrences. Our food and water systems are threatened. And unfortunately, ecosystems and human life hang in the balance. These are indeed trying and dangerous times. But there is hope. 2 words. Anybody know them? Landscape architecture. Let's hear it. Now, although I do believe that many diverse communities can come together to tackle this problem, landscape architects are the professionals to take the lead on climate change. No doubt about it. From designing green infrastructure projects that capture carbon and clean our water, to creating multimodal transportation networks that reduce the need for fossil fuels, to managing reforestation projects that soak up pollution and rebuild natural habitats, to implementing urban agriculture projects that provide much needed food in our food deserts. But more importantly, I think landscape architects, because of their unique community engagement skills, are the profession to implement these projects in a just manner, in a way that prevents displacement, that averts environmental injustices. You see, time really is of the essence for our vulnerable communities. But you know, landscape architects and ASLA, we must also do better and act with urgency to take the lead in moving the public discourse forward. As the voice of the profession, ASLA embraces its role in advocating for policies and practices to bring us all to a net zero carbon future. And the society does work tirelessly to strengthen the profession's design and build real-world solutions to this crisis. Many of you know in this room that ASLA does strongly oppose any efforts to withdraw the United States from its commitments made in the Paris Agreement. We must not weaken our obligations to do our share to reduce emissions and adopt policies that lead to climate-resilient development. And that's why ASLA is so proud to be a signatory of the We Are Still In Declaration. The only, I'm going to repeat this, the only organization within the design and building industry to do so. We are still in because we know that nature-based solutions are advantageous to our communities, our environment, and the health of our world. I can tell you something else we're very proud of. We are so proud that the Kresge Foundation identified ASLA to be one of just 9 organizations that have adopted a holistic approach to educating their members and the public about climate change. And that includes educating them about the adaptation, mitigation, and the explicit consideration of social injustice. We know it's time to act now. And that is why ASLA also recently convened a blue ribbon panel on climate change and resilience. This panel produced a comprehensive report entitled Smart Policies for a Changing Climate. The report identified core principles, key planning and design strategies, public policies that are critical to promoting healthy and climate-smart, resilient communities. Now, these policies that we enact, that we put into place in this report, are fully aligned with the Green New Deal. And so today, ASLA is very excited that the Green New Deal for Public Housing Act was introduced in Congress. This measure would help some of our most vulnerable communities address climate change by reducing carbon emissions in public housing units. We're thrilled that the bill also calls for community gardens and bike lanes on these properties. ASLA supports this first step. We look forward to improving this legislation and to its swift passage. But let's be clear, this is indeed an important first step. But we cannot wait for Congress. We can't wait for the federal government. Having worked on Capitol Hill for many years, I can tell you firsthand that it is a beautifully lethargic system. And we cannot wait. All of us here, students, educators, practitioners, if you're doing residential, transportation, all areas of landscape architecture, we must all come together and come up with concrete steps. Tell us about specific projects that are addressing climate change. And let's come up with targeted action plans. Because I think if we do, if we come together, it will be a green new day at ASLA. And so it is that sense of urgency that brings us here today and that brings this panel here today. We're going to hear from 3 dynamic global practitioners who are not wasting time, who are out there leading the charge and making a difference. And so with no time to waste, let's get the presentation started. Today, we're thrilled that Andrew Revkin has agreed to be our moderator. Andrew is the founding director of the Initiative on Communication and Sustainability at the Earth Institute at Columbia University. He has served as a strategic advisor for environmental and science journalism at the National Geographic Society, a senior reporter for climate change at ProPublica, and he was a reporter for the New York Times from 1995 through 2009, where he created its .Earth environmental blog. Andrew is a journalist, author, educator, and accomplished musician. Talk about an amalgamation, huh? We are so delighted to have Andrew here today. So please join me in welcoming Andrew to the stage. Thank you.
It's incredibly exciting to be here, especially the award ceremony, to see a professional society spend so much of its time and effort honoring the next generation of leaders is great. Journalists could take a lesson from that. They don't really do that. Now at Columbia, I'm not just working on building better journalists, but building a better communication environment. We are surrounded by ways to communicate, but the last few years has felt kind of like we don't get it. And there's some people who get it, and that's how do we tame this new communication environment? How do we design for progress in that part of the Earth system? Is just a subset of the question of design on the ground that you all work on so hard. For me, this has been a really strange journey. As a reporter, you grow up telling stories. Stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Climate change emerged in the 80s when I had already spent time and won awards writing conventional stories about a problem like a misuse of a pesticide over here in Thailand and Trinidad or the like. And along comes global warming, and it felt like, okay, this is another one of those stories. So 31 years ago, I wrote my first long magazine article on global warming, and it's kind of got a hot message to it, right? It sort of feels like what's been in headlines lately. I should have already known Ian McHarg's work. Ian, I wrote his obituary in 2001 at the New York Times much later, and I got to know what he called palpitating heartism. If you go on YouTube, you can find this great documentary about Ian McHarg's his Design with Nature concept. In 1969, he's giving this talk about how he was, as a Scotsman, he was just trying to sell things to people, worry about this. And he had that phrase, palpitating heartism, as a thing. And that's a lot of what this is about. So I got forward into the story, going forward from 1988, and slowly its complexity in multiple dimensions became clearer to me. And also, the complexity is nowhere clearer than when you look at the back of the same magazine and you see a cigarette ad. So what does that say? Yeah, here we are, a prize-winning magazine selling global warming on the front and cigarettes on the back. That's led me, in more recent years, the last decade or so, to look at this communication environment more holistically. We'll hear more about holistic approaches to problem solving in a minute. How do people listen to information? Is science journalism useless if people are locked into positions? And it's not just climate change on vaccination or so many other issues, nuclear power versus renewables. Is it just for journalists? Is it fine to just keep going, telling stories and thinking that's going to change the world? Is it appropriate for landscape designers looking at invasive species and fire in California and so many other issues around the world to just be doing the same old approach of selling something? And right now, it's pretty clear we're in a new environment where building better discourse is just as vital as telling a good story. And that's where we're going to go today in this wonderful discussion with a panel that are just, each one of them is a luminary. And so we're going to call them out and get going on this. Kongyan Yu and Kochkan Varaakam and Hitesh Mehta. This is your life. So we'll start in China, which is so much a part of the fate of the planet going forward.
Good afternoon. It is my great pleasure to come here to share some of my understanding of climate change and about the profession of landscape architecture. We are talking about action now. We are about waste no time. So my topic is Sponge City, action now. Flood adaptation solutions inspired by the ancient wisdom. So climate change plus, not only just climate change, altogether we have all these problems: flood, drought, and pollution, habitat loss. But climate change is nothing new. It's been here for millions of years, always changing. So climate change is man's struggle in finding solutions to survive. There are two legendary figures in Chinese mythology. The first one is female, the creator of human being. After her gave birth to man, climate change. The sky is leaking, water pours. So she had to fix it, to fix the sky. But there's flood still coming, right? So in Chinese mythology, we have another figure, another god. His name is called Yu the Great. We share the same family name, by the way. And he was the first landscape architect, I told you, because he knew how to use measure, to use rules, to design, to plan the landscape, to manage water, and to manage particularly flood, and build the city without being destroyed by flood. So he was elected the first king of China, the first king of the Middle Kingdom. That's the landscape architect, the first king. So I always describe the profession of landscape architecture as the art of survival. And because of such hundreds, thousands of years surviving experience, we have accumulated a rich, very rich wisdom in dealing with climate change, when dealing with all this changing environment, particularly through aquaculture, developed in the monsoon climate. We have, you can see, we are able to build cities. We are able to create productive land in the marsh, livable, productive, and beautiful. But unfortunately, this kind of wisdom was much buried under the layer we call industrialized civilization. Yet, the technology we use to deal with climate change. Concrete, pipes, pumps turn out to be unresilient. They're not adaptable to the changing climate. They have no resilience here. So after so much suffering in the past decades, at least in China, 60% of Chinese cities suffering flood every year. So it's time to revive the nature-based solution inspired by the ancient wisdom. And inspired by such wisdom of adapting to nature, we have developed the idea of sponge, green sponge, retain water, clean water, and recharge the aquifer. And the city built upon sponge is called a sponge city. Believe it or not, sponge city now become a national movement in China. All the cities have to be designed as a sponge city. How does that happen? First strategy is to begin with a political campaign to reclaim landscape architecture as the profession of kingship, stewardship of king, managing the land, stewardship of managing of water. So that's what I did. 16 years ago, I published the first book called Letters to Mayors and the Letters to the Leaders of China. Now the book is available in the bookstore here, the ASLI bookstore. It's just translated last year. Through this political campaign, we have made this green-based ecological solution or nature-based solution a national law, a national legislation. And the second strategy is a plan to have a vision, have territory vision, have king's vision to plan an ecological infrastructure across the scale, the city, the region, the nation, and across continent. So that we plan the ecological infrastructure as a green sponge. And the third step is to create the green sponge inspired by the traditional wisdom, simple cut and fill, field making, cultivating, fertilizing, irrigation, and we design models and test these models, post-operational studies, and finally develop those replicable engineering models and apply those models at massive scale, at inexpensive scale, without cost so much money, just at large scale. So in the past 20 years, we have built over 500 projects in 200 cities, in more than 200 cities, all over China and beyond. So I just give you one project to show you how this can happen. This project is in the south tip of China, in Hainan Island. As I can show you, the problem as usual. Flood, drought, pollution happens all the time, year-round. So the step is to begin with a political campaign, a brainwash, because our mind is suffocated with all this idea about the use gray infrastructure. We have to change the mind. So I give 3 lectures to mayors, to local officials, and virtually every officials have certain kind of power, have to listen to the lectures. And the local television broadcast the lecture 15 minutes every day for a whole year, for 1 year. Now that's a campaign. So virtually everyone on the street know what is Sponge City. When one day I walk on the street, people catch me, serve me dinner free. That's a real story. At the same time, we did a master plan for the city to see where will be flooded today or in the future. Here you can see different color will show what the flood will happen because of monsoon and because of climate change. And then we identify where is a critical point to start with, a strategic point, a place right in the middle of the city, the red spot, to demonstrate how this can work. That's the site. You can see how this space supposed to be given water, but now being occupied by these, we call it illegal buildings. You know, the people just build over this wetland, build over all these floodplain. But recover this idea about dealing with water, about a sponge in the Pearl River Delta. Cut and fill, create a sponge, livable space, revival of the ancient wisdom right in the middle of the city. Not only for the quantity of water, but also for the quality of water. This system will remove all the nutrient, island, and make a cut and fill, create island in the lake, create a forest above this lake, like banyan tree, let banyan tree to absorb all the nutrient, and at the same time create a habitat and public space right in the middle of the city. It happened. Action now. Remove all those. This may not happen here, but it happened in China right now. Remove all this illegal building and give back space to water and recover all these rivers, wetland. As imagination of this can be happen, and in 1 year, we'll build it. You see, and 2 years later, it's finished almost. Yeah, that's today. You can see forest covering the lake, pond and dike system surrounding the lake to retain and clean the water. That was before, and that's today. Forest over the wetland, cleansing and retaining water. That's built in just 2 years. Now, this was before. We tested. This was before. The city was flooded like that. Now, this was today, after monsoon storm water. So this project became a catalyst for a whole movement, a campaign for the whole island. Now, I'll just show you how this gray infrastructure can be transformed into a green infrastructure. Remove all the concrete, recover the landscape, inspired by the ancient wisdom, and create green sponge. That's built today, and it's still happening. Yeah. So to conclude, more than ever, it is clear that we need to have a paradigm shift in planning and designing our city to adapt to the changing climate, the changing environment, to solve the multiple urban water problems. And such shift need us to rethink the gray infrastructure, the technologies we depend on, the cities we have built, and to recover the ancient wisdom and upgrade it to provide multiple ecosystem service. This I called the Big Feet Revolution. And controversially, I will say this is a king's art of survival, to think like a king. You may not agree with that, but you need to have a king's vision of the future of the city. But definitely, we have to act like a peasant. Thank you.
Thank you. You've demonstrated you need no introduction. That was awesome. And it showed the importance of the bottom-up strategy being there. You can't have success without both vision and distributed capacity.
Exactly.
It's a little harder in the United States. We'll figure that out in our discussion.
Well, yeah, we'll discuss. I mean, it's just different way. You still need a top-down system. You have law. Right. You by electing the president, you create a very powerful law that still can be top-down.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's a different way, but have the same idea. We need a king's vision certainly a white skin, not
And the cool thing about yeah, I know. The cool thing about this capacity, it can be a mayor or a governor. At every level, you can have that vision carried forward. So that's what's exciting.
But that's what we think is we should think globally and act locally.
Right.
So locally is a peasant skill. That's the idea.
So now we're going to focus on another critical feature of the Earth system, deltas. River deltas are a young part of our geology, and they're sinking. 10 years ago, I wrote a piece on my .earth blog at the New York Times for people who know American music. There's Delta Blues. I wrote a piece called the Delta Blues because there are these realities, rapid subsidence, dynamics, flooding, and you either live with it or you try to fight it. And there's no one who knows this better than Kutch, who's been working in Thailand, but much more broadly in Southeast Asia and beyond now, has a great vision for how to be inclusive in our planning and not only talking to people who already have a microphone or are already connected to power, but also the people in the slums along the canals in thousands of cities and who need their wisdom to be promulgated as well. And suitably, you just won your second big award of the year related to this. You're one of Time's 100 Next, young emerging leaders in sustainability. And earlier in the year, you were named one of the 15 women leading the climate change fight. So that deserves a round of applause right there. So take us to your porous city, porosity. I love that, porosity, porous city network. Thank you again.
Hi, everyone. Don't take advantage of time. My mother used to always say that. As a child, I don't really understood what it meant. All I wanted to do was play. Growing up in Bangkok, in a row house, next to the busy road, always filled with heavy traffic. In front of my house, there was a big parking lot, and that was my playground. The only living creature I would find and have fun with were these sneaky little plants trying to grow through the crack of the concrete pavement. My favorite games was to dig the bigger and bigger hole through these cracks. Widening each crack was challenging. Each crack meant more space and more life for my little friends, so I felt obligated to do it. And yes, landscape architecture gives me the opportunity to continue my cracking ambition to connect this land back to nature. Here you can see Bangkok growing in every direction for the past century, shifting from a porous agricultural land, the land that can breathe and absorb water, to a concrete jungle. Today, a city of 15 million people living, working, and commuting on top of shifting muddy river delta. Bangkok is sinking more than 1 centimeter per year, which is 4 times faster than the rate of predicted sea level rise. This is what it looks like after 30 minutes of rainfall. And with a heavy rain, nothing much, just crocodile on the street. Before, flooding meant livelihood to us Thai people. Flooding meant food, settlement, seasonal change. Our life was adapted to the wet and dry season. And you could call us amphibious. We live both on land and on water. We were adapted to both. The relationship of flood has changed. With modern city infrastructure, I no longer allow our amphibious nature to flourish. The only relationship we had with flood is concrete dams, which get higher, higher, and higher through the rising flood each year. Until one day, we realize we are damned. In 2011, Thailand was hit by the most damaging and the most expensive flood disaster in our history. Flooding has turned central Thailand into an enormous lake. All modes of transportation were shut down. Here is the flood scale to the scale of Bangkok, outlined here in yellow. The water was overflowing from the north, making its ways across several provinces just to get to the ocean. Look closely in that yellow outline. We sacrificed millions of Thai upstream just to keep our capital from getting wet. This is how climate injustice looks like. Millions of my people were displaced and hopeless. At that time, my mom was very sick. She has a weak muscle and sensitive skin. It was hard to mobilize her. It was a very last minute until the flood surrounded our home. The tap water started to smell and taste sour. We realized that dirty water could kill my mother. At the moment of life and death, as my mom got sicker, as my home began to flood, as my city continued to sink, I better understood, don't take advantage of time. I could not just sit and wait. The city needed me and I have to fix this problem. A year after the disaster, there was a competition of the public park to celebrate the oldest university of Thailand of its 100th anniversary. To enter this competition, I started my firm with 4 of my students. Bangkok is a flat city, so we harnessed the power of gravity by inclining the whole park to collect every drop of rain. At the highest point of the park, it is a green roof equipped with the 3 rainwater tanks underneath to absorb rain. The leftover of the runoff then flows through wetlands with native plants and cascading pond to have clean water. And at the lower end, the retention pond to collect all of the water. By inclining this park, we can hold and collect 1 million gallons of water. This is an amphibious design. This park shows how we can live with water rather than fear it. And yes, we won the competition. But right after the moment of victory, one of the committee came to me and said, "Congratulations, but being a winner doesn't mean your design will get built." I felt numb. Having a park might seem very simple in many other cities, but not in Bangkok, which has one of the lowest public green space per capita among megacities in Asia. We had only 5 years before the university anniversary to realize this concept on the land worth $700 million US, that this park is not just for city beautification. It must help the city deal with water and confront climate change. With countless meetings to convince each and every stakeholder, our park became the first public green space in central Bangkok in 30 years. The 11 acres park, a big green crag at the heart of Bangkok, opened for 2 years. And today we won the ASLA award. Thank you. Centenary Park is not just the first big green crag, and it didn't stop me to making an even bigger one. At Thammasat University, the biggest urban green roof for urban farming will open next month, mimicking the rice terraces that absorb rain, slow down runoff, and grow food for the campus. Smaller cracks matter just as much. We take on all the wet space across the city, the unused helipad on top of the hospital, and turn it into the biggest healing garden in Thailand. It is the first time the waste from the hospital be used in this garden, creating the healing process for the medical staff, and the first time the Thai government hospital have an open sky healing space for their patients. We also took on the abandoned infrastructure, the highway. This is the failed government mega project that left unused for more than 30 years. We turned it into the Green Pedestrian Bridge. And Bangkok will unveil its new landmark next year. One of the work of landscape architects that close to my heart is working with marginalized community. We also help community along canals and coastline because they are most affected from the climate impact. By co-creating the process, we teach them the simple landscape solution that they can build upon themselves, like restoring the mangrove, help them save the soul of community, the existing tree. The importance of rain gardens, and just simple solution like restore the rainwater tank at home. And our work can't be complete if we don't bring along the new generation of built environment to equip them with knowledge and the challenge of that city at risk and that they can make different right now. Last month, before I came here, I went to one of the community along the coast of Greater Bangkok. And what I expecting to see is the most productive natural barrier, the mangrove. But this is what I found. The countless of shrimp farms. Here is the temple I visit. 40 years ago, it was inland. Right now, it's part of the sea. There, I saw a big Buddha statue, not doing a usual meditation pose, but have his two hands up against the ocean. I think he was trying to help us stop sea level rise. Amid all the work I have put in, sometimes it hits me really hard how big and complicated the problem is. And this is not just crisis in my hometown. Climate change has the most impact on densely populated delta cities that are sinking across the globe. New York, London, Los Angeles, New Orleans, Bangkok, Penang, Jakarta, and many more. We are confronting the global crisis. What can we do, landscape architect? Our work can no longer just be business as usual. Our work can no longer just for our client. What we are working on should be part of the global solution. And what we need is all of us here, a global community, to help implement the solution. When I think about climate change and all the deadlines that line up, 2030, 2050, 2100. What my mom said, don't take advantage of time, comes to my mind. This picture depicts two of the most important people in my life, my mother and my daughter. They are my foundation of life. Right now, half of my foundation has gone. My mother's passing away has taught me that the real deadline that we have is time that remaining in our life. Left in this picture is only me and my daughter. And I couldn't imagine when I'm gone what kind of future she have to live with. Air pollution, dirty ocean, heat wave, flood at home, and more disaster to come. And I don't want to leave her with that. I want to leave her with the world with good health, prosperity, and hope for tomorrow. And to ensure the world she deserves and her generation deserve, I have to do my best for the time that I have remained. For life is too short, and tomorrow promises nothing. What will you do with your time that remains for the land we call home? And for who are you doing it for? Thank you. ขอบคุณค่ะ
There's much to talk about there. I just have one quick follow-up question before we get to Hitesh, and then have a quick discussion after that. You've raised this importance of dialogue, and it's that dialogue process to me is more important than telling stories.
Yes.
Meaning me writing another article in the New York Times doesn't feel nearly as valuable as building the capacity on the ground in places that matter, and then having that discussion across the world where communities that face common issues, delta subsidence, mountain and fire, we can create that. And I have an idea. Maybe I'll wait till the end. I have an idea for ASLA, the Earth Institute, and some other organizations. Thank you. That was great. So Hitesh, I can't believe I haven't met you already, because you're everywhere and you are everything. You have this. You bring new meaning to the word holistic. You've been lauded as a fellow in 2 different disciplines, architecture and landscape architecture. You work on I don't know how many countries, on continents. Your clients include not only communities design, but protected areas, figuring out how to do that, and which means your clients include mountain gorillas, and your clients include Costa Rican jaguars. And you also were a Hall of Fame cricket captain, which is a pretty wild thing to fit into a life. And there's one more feature we'll talk about later. So could you bring us forward in your work and your vision of how we can address climate change?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Namaste, good afternoon, all of you. My presentation is going to be on stewardship and climate emergency in landscape architecture. For the past decade, we've been really trying to get to the bottom of what entails stewardship. We feel that this terminology, stewardship, has lost somewhat its spark. There's been a lot of lip service. Because of our work with marginalized indigenous communities around the world, for us, stewardship is a committed, conscious, straight from the soul effort to take long-term care of terrestrial and marine ecosystems and the indigenous peoples that live in or around them. And that these conscientious and soulful efforts can best be achieved through planning and design approaches that are ego-less but eco-more, where the Homo sapien is not the superior species, but that we are equal to all other non-human species, plants and animals. We have committed ourselves to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and our work embraces 6 of the 17 goals: life on land, life below water, no poverty, zero hunger, gender equality, and and finally climate action, which in a way embraces all the other previous goals as well. Our climate-friendly actions with indigenous communities around the world have been addressing issues such as sea level rise, food security, flooding, desertification, and carbon sequestration. And our work across 64 countries in all 6 continents have sadly gotten us to truly comprehend and understand that we are in a perilous state of climate emergency. Mother Earth has passed on from the general ward and is now in the ICU. So I'd like to share with you a climate emergency master plan that we worked on in Kenya, which is called, it's a long name, Integrated Biodiversity, Pastoralism, and Tourism Development Master Plan for the Naboisho Wildlife Conservancy, which is a 50,000-acre site just north of one of the most famous, most iconic national reserves parks in the world, the Masai Mara National Park in Kenya. And this particular conservancy is owned by the Koyaki Masai, and they have a subsect called the Dorobo, which are the closest connection to our hunter-gatherer ancestors. And what these guys did is they took this 50,000 acres, cut the whole land into 1,000 lots of 50 acres each. And each family has a lot of cows. You know, for them, cow is God. There are lots of goats. And before you know it, the whole land is overgrazed. And with climate change and climate extreme weathers, flooding, drought, the whole land had become parched. But the Maasai are some of the most fiercely proud people on the planet, and they are very progressive. So they brought in some tourism partners, and they said, look, we are going to take our cattle, and we're going to move our houses outside this conservancy. We want to create a wildlife conservancy and use ecotourism as a way for us to have some sustainable development and lifestyles. And they also brought in a landscape architect, or us, for a visioning workshop. And then as landscape architects, we brought in ornithologists, we brought in botanists, we brought in a mammal expert, and we brought in a hydrologist. And then for about 3 days, we walked with the Maasai. We wanted to see the land through their eyes. We wanted to feel the property through their hearts. And we started walking around, and we tasted their medicinal plants that they still use. We looked at their ancestral hunting grounds. Hunting has been banned in Kenya since 1976, but we wanted to, this is still a sacred site for them. We made sure that the women and the children were all included in the planning processes. This is a paternalistic society, but they're very progressive. And at night, we sat under the full moon, and we heard their oral stories. Kunjan talked about ancient wisdom. This is where that wisdom is being passed on as well. We wanted to hear that. And when we became more intimate and they trusted us, we started studying their hairstyles. We started studying their jewelry, understanding their culture through sketching and drawing, and their connections with the birds and nature and the trees. And then we did studies with GIS technology to understand land cover, to understand ecosystems, drainage patterns, wildlife corridors. And once that was done, we presented the analytical studies and our observations to the local community members. Cross-section of them, but particularly the women. Latest studies are now showing that for climate change and action, extremely important to educate the women. And we sat with the park managers to understand the infrastructure, the roads, the trail systems. And it is at this time we brought the elders together got them on the drawing board, and we've got them to show us their sacred places, their spiritual sites. Got them to do it. Community empowerment. And they showed us where their spiritual ceremonies take place, where the male bonding areas are, where the sacred hills are. And then we come to the office and hand draw an illustrated master plan. It's like a Van Gogh impressionist style, 7-layered plan. The hydrology expert comes in, identifies the drainage basins, creates reservoirs so the cattle can come in and drink water during the droughts. Same with the wildlife species. And we created places where during drought, the cattle can come into the conservancy and there's controlled grazing that can take place. We created zero carbon arrival experiences using eco-friendly building materials, native species, green roofs. And finally, they came to us and said, look, we own this lodge. In fact, it's one of the few indigenous communities on the planet that own their own lodge. And they wanted us to eco-furbish it and eco-upgrade it. And that was what we saw, a dilapidated experience. That's their laundry. The bed linen was being washed this way. So we went in and we looked at the whole picture and we created a site plan that sort of, in some ways, it was inspired by the Masai Manyata, the homestead experience. We came back to the offices and created, again, hand-drawn illustrations so we could present to them visually what their new camp will look like. And that experience that the guests will get with the wildlife. So they gave us the go-ahead, and we made sure that not one single tree was cut. And in fact, carbon sequestration took place, and the client ended up growing and planting 100,000 trees to store the carbon dioxide. And these photographs were taken exactly a month ago. You can see the trees are beginning, because these are very slow growing trees as well. The trees are all growing up, and then when you see the whole camp, there's harmony of the building architecture with the landscape. And even for the grazers and animals, we want to make sure that when they look at our human structures, that there is some kind of harmony and peace with them. They're not full of ego, but just very plain. And through small landscape interventions, we wanted to make sure we connect people with the land, a spiritual connection. And I want to end with this. It's really a win-win-win-win situation for everyone. The grazers have come back. There is green grass. You can sit down now, draw them up as well, and sketch them. They're not going to be running anywhere. With the grazers come the carnivores. And Simba, the lion, can come back to his traditional hunting grounds. And with Simba comes the vultures. And of course, this is authentic and real, so even Shenji joins Simba. And the circle of life is now back in its place, with the elephants, with the hippos. For the tourists, they pay top dollar to get magical experiences. This is a sundowner in the conservancy. And you get to go with a female professional Maasai guide, very rare, on this particular experiences. And it's really Hakuna Matata for the local people, because at the end of the month, whether the lodges have got tourists or not, they get a fixed amount of money right through onto their cell phones. You know, Kenya was the first country that introduced bankless banking. Even Google went to learn from them. So when the money goes to the local people, they can maintain their cultural lifestyles. Their cultural landscapes are maintained. Their children can go to school, and they're some of the most intelligent kids that I've come across, very out there. So what do we see? the Conservancy has turned into a green bank. During the droughts, the cows come in, and just for a while there, you can see there's good harmony with the wild animals. And one final win, apart from quite a few of the awards the project has won for the locals around the world, Landscape Architecture Foundation has identified this project as the only project from Africa to be part of their case study. So, thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic. Well, it's the end of a big conference, and it's the latter part of a day, but I don't know about you all, but I'm feeling pretty pumped up by this. You know, after 30 years of writing about climate change, people say, how could you possibly keep writing about this issue? And it's because I constantly am surrounded by innovations and passion for solutions. And to me, the thing I want to know is, how do we spread this around? You know, my part of the environment is the communication environment. And also, I'm a numbers guy, and the scale issue is one of these things that's so important. Whether you're thinking about billions of tons of CO2, which is the mitigation part of the climate problem, or how do you get hundreds of thousands of communities in wildfire zones, like here in California, flood zones on coasts, the inland flooding regions, and so many other places. How can we build that capacity and fast forward? The one thing that is behind the idea of a climate emergency, too often I see that articulated as a CO2. It's all about cutting carbon, and that's absolutely a huge vital part of this, but vulnerability crisis is there behind this bigger thing called the climate crisis. And the great thing that you've all illustrated is that it's actionable. On the community scale, you can reduce vulnerability. You can boost resilience and adaptive capacity. You can have triple wins for lions and people. You can have all of that if we get that as an urgent part of the picture. So I want to ask, maybe Kutch, could I ask you, do you feel that that's adequately part of what people think of immediately when they think of the climate crisis? Is the public generally and leaders in the climate movement, are they missing an opportunity here?
I think for my context, of course, we are a country that's considered developing country,
right,
or our neighbors still less developed country. So when you talk about climate change, they might feel like, what about the food for dinner? So I think that's kind of like two different scales that when they're concerned. And those people are the most affected people on the ground. And of course, many politicians start to aware. But of course, in those, how can we merge that two scales together to really come up with the solution, and of course, scaling up as much as possible. So I just feel that we can't, as a landscape architect, we cannot just do only client-based solution, but also working with the community together, because when you talk about mangrove, I'm talking about the coastline. We're not talking about just small little things, but first thing we have to get something started first, and of course, we are running out of time.
Right. And Hitesh and Jillian, you've dealt with rural indigenous communities.
Yeah.
Is there a role there, now that mobile phone technology is around, radio is almost ubiquitous in the world, where can this story of the possibilities on this end be spread, where it's not spreading? What could be done?
Yeah, I think, we end up traveling quite a bit, both to cities and to remote areas. And we find that the remote areas there's so much more vulnerability. You look at the tsunamis or the hurricanes that hit Mozambique this year,
right,
or last year, there's a lot of damage that's going on, and they don't have the resources like the urban cities have, like New Orleans or right, a lot of the other places, London or whatever. So I think that it's so important to get the message across and out there. And technology these days is it's just amazing what information technology. They call the Kenyan the Silicon Savannah. And a lot of the people out there, the kind of stuff that they're doing out there is amazing. But I think information is just one thing, but trying to change individual lifestyle is a big, major thing.
Actual practice,
Yes.
Yeah, that's such a big part of the challenge. In China, as you said and described so effectively, there is a capacity from the leadership to really exert a lot of influence on what happens at these regional scales. It's unusual that way in the sense that China's not unique, but it has that power to really. You have 600 people working for you, right?
Yeah.
In your office, and the scale is astounding. So I don't know, but I would love to see the vision that you've shown, that the demonstrable success. Can that be spread more rapidly globally? Is there a new opportunity to do that?
A human being is a kind of animal which have no longer vision.
Yeah.
We are even, and we cannot, we are just, this climate change is just a tragedy of commons.
Right.
So we lose, certainly we need a big vision.
Right.
But that vision we cannot just talk about, you cannot realize it. So until individuals suffering,
Right.
will eventually develop this kind of skills, wisdom. Yeah.
Right.
So that's why I think we have to think globally and act locally.
Right.
Which means we need a strong leadership. This can be a human being or can be a law. In US, I will say you have democratic society, you can create a law. Back in my country, maybe a wise leader is more important, right? So I think that's both okay. Top-down system, create a vision, make it down. At the bottom, what I'm thinking is why, it's a scale, about scaling.
Yeah.
Think about maybe 30 or 20% of the globe is covered by agriculture, right? Or maybe not so much, but it's a faster scale,
Right.
and created by, like Southeast Asia, Maya people, the South America.
Right.
All those terraces, all these are based on adaptation to climate, to water, particularly to water. So I'm very optimistic about that. If we can rediscover, revival the wisdom at the bottom, and if we can create a vision at the top, we can make it down. Why we have 600 people? When I went back to China, I only have one people, myself, and my wife. And I give a talk to mayors, talk to politicians. I write letters to president.
That was a very courageous letter, by the way.
Yeah.
15 years ago, to write that to the Chinese leadership was.
Yeah, that's right.
Deal.
So I keep writing and keep posting these messages, and suddenly you catch the idea. Okay, and thanks to ASLA, I will say the Sponge City was spread through ASLA in 2012, when my project, the Sponge City project, got awarded here, and it suddenly appeared in Chinese news, television, and the president got the idea. Okay, Sponge City, now that's the idea. We can solve the problem. So I think that's the media, the wise leadership, the bottom-up craftsmanship of landscape architecture. Three things together. The media, so important.
Right.
Times, New York Times. No, you should keep writing, posting. And television, that's make it happen. That's, I think, the three things, three strategies will make this happen. So I'm quite optimistic. And we have profession. We need a new definition of the profession. I call this the art of survival. We are not the landscaping gardeners. We're not ornamental decorator. We are server. We are saving the world like 50 years ago. It's a Mark said.
I agree. And I do think that this component, building resilient, thriving landscapes, really deserved more attention decades ago in the climate discussion. Al Gore, who's someone I've known forever, he endorsed my first book on global warming when he was still Senator Gore. Yeah. So that's how old I am. But I think if I could criticize him about one thing, it's that he In his first book, in 1992, he wrote that adaptation is a form of laziness, which, you know, given the inertia in the climate system, if you're just waiting for success on carbon dioxide, how much vulnerability were you creating in the meantime? 2013, he wrote a book in which he said he made a mistake, that he wrote, there's a moral imperative to do both of these things, to boost capacity for resilience and adaptation on the ground and cut emissions as hard as we can. I wish he would say that more in public, because that's really, I don't think it's there yet. So that is part of my job, is to make sure the story, the full scope of the story, the opportunities you all have described are out around. But the reason I'm at Columbia, not writing regularly for the New York Times now, is to boost the capacity for communities to talk to each other. And for social media, the upside of social media is for these great ideas to propagate wherever they can go. Digital Green in India is a YouTube network for farmers to tell their own stories to other farmers in their languages. And not every farming family in India has web access, but every village has an internet cafe. So I'm exploring how do we use those tools to do more. Now here's the idea I wanted to float to you all as we come toward the end of our discussion and a final event. ASLA, as soon as I've been hearing here through the last few days and today, I would love to help connect you with the American Geophysical Union, which is meeting in San Francisco in a few weeks. And they have something called Thriving Earth Exchange. The website is thrivingearthexchange.org. It's about 5 years old, and it's a way for scientists, it's kind of a Match.com for scientific expertise in community problems. So a community in the Midwest, or actually in Bangladesh with flooding problem, can find a hydrologist. And I would love to see ASLA and AGU and the Earth Institute, where I work, expand that a little bit. So if there's a gap in community capacity to hold a discussion, to have some of this information actionable on the ground, it just feels like a natural pairing. So AGU, ASLA, and I could think of a couple others to get in the room to try to ramp up, to accelerate getting this wisdom out and around, and then it can become adapted to local conditions and the like. Does that feel like a good idea, or I don't know?
Oh yes, of course.
Hitesh, what do you think?
I think, yeah, great idea, definitely.
So we'll commit to that. Hey, ASLA, I'll help make this happen. I'm basically a professional middle child. I was a middle child. And as a journalist, I've always been kind of well, what do you think about that? So let's make that happen. So we're now at a point where when I think of communication innovation, most of what I just described is technological, a way for an idea to spread around the world. But there's also music. You heard earlier, I'm a musician. My band's playing in a week up in the Hudson River Valley. And there's someone here who's not only a cricket veteran and a holistic designer, he's got another talent. And Hitesh, I think we're going to turn the floor to you shortly to describe in other ways where we head from here. Shall we?
Well, my story really began, I think it was 88. I was in a class in Berkeley with Claire Cooper Marcus. And it's a graduate class, so she brings to the class one day Lawrence Halprin. And Lawrence Halprin starts talking about how, with his wife, he's choreographing bodies and the environment through dance. And then he starts talking about all of these philosophical approaches to creativity and arts and all these scoring indexes. And I'm not that intelligent, so it just went over my head a little bit. I promised myself, I said one day I'll try and do a simpler kind of way to get the message across. And I was into photography those days, still am. And my host family taught me how to do macro photography. So I went up into the Sierras and started doing some macro photography. And then through 31 years now, maybe over 100 countries, using very special equipment. And then, of course, also using telephoto lenses to try and capture the essence and spirit of the places that we are trying to protect. And I then started doing a little choreography with my wife, simple one. And if it's okay with you and it's fine, I'd like to maybe dedicate a dance to a fellow Kenyan colleague, Ayub Ogada. He passed away about a year ago. He's the greatest exponent of the nyatiti, which is a six-stringed instrument. Ayub Ogada was the sidekick for Robert Redford in the movie Out of Africa. And the song that I would love to dance to, it was the background song for the movie Constant Gardener. And he was just one of those great musicians. And my dance I'd like to do is actually called a nature and culture spirit dance. And so what it does is actually looks at the different ways that people around the world meditate and pray to the higher spirits. And what I've been working on is trying to see how we can connect all of that with the photography as a background. Some of that was taken about 2 weeks ago in Nepal. And the message is that if we don't change our lifestyles, make changes, that everything that you see up there will be gone.
Right.
So.
Well, and before we actually see this performance, I just want to thank you all for contributing so much, and everyone here for contributing these last few days. The sessions have been extraordinary, and I think this profession is coming of age in a way that's profoundly important at a time when the world really needs it. So thank you all for having me here, and let's keep this conversation going forward. And let's dance.
Let's dance.
We leave the stage in your good hands.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aye.